Hello and welcome to the AVForums podcast for Monday the 24th of June, and joining me on this edition, Steve Withers.
I want to ride the pony.
Ed Selley.
1 minute you're defending the whole galaxy and suddenly you find yourself sucking down Darjeeling with Marie Antoinette and her little sister.
And Kaz Harlow.
This isn't flying, this is falling with style.
And welcome back to the podcast. Different team this week. Mark's not joining us. He forgot it's his mum's birthday.
Yeah, he was all set to, and then remember that there was the minor detail of his mother's birthday. So it was nice knowing you, Mark.
Yeah.
Well done.
So a bit Kaz is joining us this week, so lots of movie talk to go through a little later in the podcast with Kaz. So the darker nights are now starting to draw in, which is great for us AV fans. The longest day was the other day. We're now, the days are getting shorter.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a while though.
Can I just say that my next door neighbour,
did you record you having an argument and then go to the Guardian?
No, I haven't. I don't know if that's news, if their arguments are newsworthy. I was about to say that with the nights now drawing in, it's worth pointing out they've still got their Christmas tree from last Christmas lurking outside the back of the gate. So I don't know how that's going to play out, but that's all good. Nobody's perfect.
I do jest, but obviously it's now we're heading back towards projector season again, which I like projector season. I like the fact I don't feel guilty sitting watching stuff during the day when it's nice outside. There's something odd about that. And lately it's been really nice during the week while I've been working and looking out the window. And then when it comes to the weekend, you want to go enjoy yourself, it's been chucking it down with rain and all sorts. So.
It's got to be the worst June I can remember.
Yeah, for a while.
Terrible. Apart from the last couple of days, it's been quite nice.
Yeah, isn't it supposed to be 30 by the end of the week?
Yeah,
it depends. I've noticed that the forecasts have been edging downwards since the optimistic. 32 was being banded around where I am last week, but now the same days are being pegged as high 20s, which I have to be honest from the perspective of sitting here reviewing a piece of audio equipment, I can do that more comfortably.
Yeah, it's supposed to be a really bad thunder and lightning tonight here, so if I suddenly disappear.
Oh, there we go. Well, yeah, it looks like it's going to try and do it here. The air is currently of that sort of texture you can chew, but I don't know if it's actually going to release, so to speak, in a non-sexual way.
Unlike my car photograph that you commented on the other day there.
I'm sorry, that was, that's the equivalent of a perfect cross into the 6-yard box, and you can't not respond to that in the way that I did. Sorry.
You're forgiven, totally. Right, so what's everybody been doing? Kaz, we haven't spoken to you for a while. So apart from watching films, which probably takes up 99.97% of your time.
A ridiculous amount of my time, yes. I think my eyes were literally bleeding last weekend. I had to buy special witch hazel eye drops. Of course, I'd like to pretend it's nothing to do with the telly, but I'm pretty sure I watched 900 minutes of Too Old to Die Young in the same weekend that I watched the whole of Jessica Jones, which is probably another 1,000 minutes. Both in the same
you probably
weekend.
enjoyed Jessica Jones a lot more.
Yeah, yeah. My eyes, yeah. Anyway, other than that, it's all been kids' full-on parties because they seem to have a better social life than me, which I suspect.
Every time I speak to you, it's kids' parties.
How many kids have you got?
Yeah, and how often do they have birthdays?
It's not to do with our kids' parties.
Oh, yeah.
It's to do with their friends. So, there's always someone's birthday party, and thankfully they're really socially active. But it's crazy because they're super socially active. So there's always another party, and there's always another crazy event that sucks up the weekend. But I have booked myself, and I thought all you guys would be interested in this, a knife-making course.
Oh, Botright, well, he's the man to talk
Forged in
to.
fire.
Forged in fire.
Exactly. Forged in fire. I was thinking of Forged in fire when I booked it.
Kaz, are there rules about how long your tang can be? Or is that
I have zero idea. It's like the beginner's course, but you can work your way up to building like a machete. So
as long as at some point they tell you that it will kill, I think it'll be a truly life-affirming experience for you. So I'm really pleased. On the plus side, Kaz, provided that you've got a television with voice activation, you can lose all of your fingers and possibly even a hand and still be able to continue to do your job, provided that you've got voice recognition.
You say that, but my wife was telling me about turning the TV off using the voice control. because she said it was easier. So I tried it. It doesn't do anything. You have to press a button to activate voice control, and then you say, turn the telly off. And it says to you, do you want to turn the telly off? And you have to click the button yes.
So you're holding the remote control already, Kaz?
You're holding the remote control. You're pressing two buttons. Why not just press the red button at the top of the remote control?
Exactly. Me and Steve have been saying this for ages, haven't we, Steve?
Truly, we are living in the future.
That's not the future, really. The future is when my TV watches all the programs for me and tells me not to waste 900 minutes on Nicholas Winding Refn's latest.
At the moment, it does the opposite and watches what you previously watched and then tells you to watch more stuff that you might not actually want to watch.
Yes, that's very true.
Because, to be honest, if I was an AI recommending things to you, Kaz, I would recommend something by Nicholas Winding Refn because you bang on about him enough.
Yeah, maybe.
But I think you've discovered now that he's basically a pretentious twat.
But it is a Malik syndrome. I like Malik.
You like Malik, but the last three Malik films have been literally unwatchable.
But I tell you what, I'll watch the next one and hope it isn't. Because he's done some
Isn't that the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over again but expecting a different outcome.
I just hope he wakes up one day. Because he's done some great films.
Yeah, like 30 years ago.
It's like George Santayana's definition of fanaticism, which consists of redoubling your efforts when you've forgotten your aim.
It's not going to happen. You're talking to the guy who's watched every single film that Seagal's made. Okay.
I know, but I'm sorry.
That's not.
That is the definition of insanity.
Can I just say that there was an article doing the rounds on Twitter about the greatest films that Michael Caine had been in, and On Deadly Ground didn't make the cut, and I was devastated.
I really did not like making that film. I'm
sure it brought him another wing to his Jaws house. Surely.
Exactly. Yes.
Are we on topic enough for you?
Yeah. So interesting week then, Ed.
Yeah, it's been all right. It's just so much stuff. There's stuff coming everywhere. I've been experimenting with voice control because, as you know, I hate it, and I've been sent some products that do voice control. And some of my experiences can be viewed on Twitter. It is the first time that I've ever had a piece of audio equipment that knows how to make Yorkshire puddings. So there is that. But I was under the impression you guys, I mean, I know that Steve certainly has got a wiretap on the go all the time. I was under the impression that if you had more than one of them, they were supposed to be able, they ignored each other so they don't both chime in, which is abundantly not the case with the ones that are here.
Oh, I don't know about that. I've only got one.
They frequently start essentially just pissing each other off, which is, probably not what Skynet quite had in mind. But
you see, I find Alexa useless. I shouldn't say that because she's right next to me, but I find her useless apart from in the bedroom. And what I mean by that is that she's only useful to me in there because I can say, Alexa, set alarm for 6 a.m. and she does it. Or Alexa, put BBC Radio 2 on for an hour, and she does it.
You see, I found that.
Whereas if you say,
shh, there you go.
There she goes. Well, there we go. Case in point. Actually, I haven't put one in the bedroom. Kitchen's quite useful. If I'm covered in whatever I'm cooking at the time or preparing at the time, being able to say, stop playing, skip track, etc. That's quite handy. But I guess I just think I'm too old. I've lived without it for this long. I mean, my son thinks it's great, but that's fine.
Yeah. So, ladies and gentlemen, thanks very much for listening to the AVForums podcast. As you can gather here, we're all too old for new tech.
Just too old.
We get annoyed. We moan about it.
Funny. I went round to a friend's house and we had a night gaming and drinking and watching movies, and then we were talking.
It was holiday for you then.
We were talking Alexa. And Alexa, we mentioned Alexa, and Alexa lit up all the way upstairs and woke up everybody in the house.
You know that people
came to the Alexas up to the top of the house. It was ridiculous.
We should stop saying the name because anybody's listening to this podcast on speakers and it'll be going. We apologise for that.
Sorry, should we just yell "Hey Google" a couple of times as well, just for equalities? But yeah, okay. I mean, that's by the by. But no, otherwise, just loads of product for various people. I did a barbecue last night. It was down at my parents'. I remembered why I don't barbecue barefoot usually, as I stood on an exceptionally hot. I did my own personal fire walk. So I got to smell myself cooking, which is never.
You smell tasty.
I smell all right. It's not great. I don't think the sole of my foot is a great piece of meat.
No,
I don't think it's on anyone. So yeah, there's that. Which thankfully it was my clutch foot, so it wasn't that uncomfortable on the way home. But yeah, memo to self: don't barbecue barefoot. That's just stupid. And no, otherwise it's just same old, same old. I suppose let's look on the bright side. With the weather being like it is, normally somebody for one of the publications I worked for goes, Ed, it's time to review an enormous valve amplifier. And actually, I got the enormous valve amplifier out of the way a couple of weeks ago. So that's look on the bright side.
Okay, good stuff. I did a car show yesterday. Which is exactly it's what I do on a weekend, and we had great weather, so it's been the first good weekend we've had for a while doing that, and it was the first time we'd actually held our own club car show, and we had some nice motors turn up. We had somebody turn up from Glasgow, or just outside Glasgow, in a 1967 fastback, Ed, and it was in the Bullet Green, so we had the Bullet and the 67 sitting next to each other, and it was some really nice motors turned up. It was a GT350 as well, 1968, I believe it was.
That's all very smart. I mean, I was just intrigued. If the weather was good, does that mean that it was like the vampire sequence in the John Carpenter's Vampires things, where people would just walk into the sun and just burst into flames? But or had you taken the appropriate precautions?
I'd taken about 6 antihistamines because I knew it was on the grass, and I was absolutely caked in suntan lotion, but we still it got to the point where it was just too hot to stand in the sun any longer, so we were all hiding under the trees after a while, and the car
at least you didn't all just come back to your cars, turn the engine on, just sit there with the air conditioning on,
Well, no, because you ran out of petrol doing that.
No, that's a good point. That's good.
But the car's got absolutely covered in sap, so we spent the day cleaning the car today from the tree sap, because
even if it hadn't, you'd have cleaned it anyway.
Probably.
Let's be very clear about this. Yeah. But
okay,
no, the photos look lovely instantly. They're on Phil's Instagram. They look great. So
and in terms of reviews and stuff, we're going to come on to that in a sec, because I'm actually between reviews at the minute, which is why I'm not talking about product in this week's podcast. But we'll talk about that a bit later. So it just leaves the Steve Davis of the podcast. So Steve, anything interesting?
I have had a brilliant week because after last week's podcast recording and conversation, on Monday morning I ordered a from 3 home fi kit, Huawei router. Ordered that. Told BT to go themselves. I was paying £46 a month, I think, for a landline I didn't use and an internet speed of 6 meg, which wasn't even that reliable, so it kept disappearing every now and then. I'm now paying £22 a month, and I'm getting 60 meg.
And I would like to say, on behalf of both Steve and myself, for our friends in the Chinese government who are enjoying this podcast, whether they like to or not, I hope you're enjoying the show. Yeah.
I'll tell you what, for 60 meg, they can spy on me all they like. I don't care.
I have to be honest, it's not for me the little router that they send, I could really do with more than one Ethernet socket, but I can't fault how it's performed. It's been extremely good. I'm really glad that it's worked for you, Steve. So
the reason I wasn't doing it before, or I didn't consider it before, because you couldn't do unlimited, but now you can do unlimited. It's a no-brainer. Yeah, absolute no-brainer. I mean, I've got a rock solid connection, 60 meg. I mean, I'm as happy as a pig in shit.
I only get 16 meg more than you, Steve, on a wired connection, so that's exactly. Pretty good. Yeah, and the thing is, the advantage here is that when it comes to editing this podcast, I don't have to join words together now because you're not dropping out.
No, I didn't put 2 and 2 together. You do sound significantly better. The audiophile properties of faster broadband on Skype conversations. God, there's a column and a half, isn't there? So okay, good. Okay. Well, I'm really pleased. Well done, Steve.
So we've got super fast Steve. It's hard to get your tongue round. And I haven't been drinking yet.
Don't I talk fast enough as it is without any super fast?
Probably.
Absolutely, you don't.
Right. I think we need to move on and do a podcast because people have been hanging on for about 20 minutes now. So let's move to competitions. Kaz, tell us all about them.
Sure. We've got a copy of Escape Room on Blu-ray. That closes June the 25th. A copy of Instant Family on Blu-ray. That also closes on 25th of June. Copies of Criterion's June titles on Blu-ray. That's Dazed and Confused, The Heiress, and For All Mankind, July 8th. Win a copy of Arctic on Blu-ray. That's July the 1st. A copy of Under Fire on Blu-ray, July the 3rd. Fox's Father's Day 4K bundle. That's July the 1st. And from my recollection, it's 2 good sets and 1 bad. It's the X-Men trilogy. It's War for the Planet of the Battle of the Future of the Planet, The Rise of the Apes. And it's also Assassin's Creed. Then there's Last Hurrah for Chivalry and Hand of Death, 2 films by John Woo. That's 9th of July. And Donbass, 7th of July. We also got comp starting what will be today, which is The Kid Who Will Be King. And that'll finish 10th of July. Let's go with that. All comps open to eligible AVForum members resident in the UK.
Any previous winners?
I'm sure there's loads, but it says none, so I'm going to go with none.
There was none when I checked. So
okay.
If
sure.
there's
There'll
none,
be imminent competition winners.
Yes,
sure.
there should be, because there's been a few, but I think they're sitting in the holding bay at the moment.
Sure.
So
sure.
We'll find out next week. Right, so that's everything. We're all up to date. Let's go to hardware news next. I say hardware news, we don't have any hardware news, it's hardware reviews. So we've got 2 reviews this week, and we're also going to tell you what's coming up for review before the end of the month, and probably into the beginning of July as well. But to start with reviews, Steve's been looking at an AV receiver. He tends to get these things done a lot quicker than I do, because I've had the 3080 for about 6 months now.
Well, all you need to do, though, to be honest, Phil, is look at your 70 review, or whatever what you did last time, and then basically it's the same thing, but with surround AI added, and there you go. Yes.
That's basically what's there, and I've got to say, we've said this a number of times, and I don't want to sound like a broken record, but AV receiver manufacturers really need to have a long look at the industry and what they're doing, because even though the Yamaha's got new menus, it's still complicated as hell.
It's got
to set
new
up.
menus, but I was going to say, they've had a bit of a facelift, but they still don't make a lick of sense most of the time.
Yeah.
The setup is less than intuitive. One good bit of news is that they've got a new remote control, which is
and I do like
better.
I do
and
like
it's
it.
got a backlight, thank God, finally. So there's plus points. The menu system has had a facelift, but it is still not the most intuitive. The remote control is definitely a big improvement. It's more sensibly laid out, because the old ones were just a mass of tiny buttons, and in the dark you had absolutely no idea what you were doing. Now it's backlit, it's more ergonomic in terms of its design, so that's good. It looks exactly the same as all the previous generations, which isn't a bad thing. They're an attractive AVR, very well made.
But all things being relative, it's not something that I believe deserves an immediate place in the New York Museum of Modern Art, but by the standards of an AV receiver, it looks all right. The one thing is, can I just be clear on this? The one thing they've done, and again, if you are a manufacturer of AV receivers, you may find this interesting, asymmetric AV receivers look crap because they're huge. If they're symmetrical, it massively reduces the perceived bulk of the product. So Yamaha ones look quite nice because they've got 2 big symmetrical knobs on them. You're very welcome.
What about Arkham, who put their big knob in the middle?
But remember, it does look better than the old ones that didn't have a knob at all, and essentially look like a storage heater. So again, it's a step forward. It is symmetrical, so it does work. The NAD 777 V3, which I liked very much, was asymmetric, and it just looked. It wasn't actually physically bigger than the Yamaha it replaced, but it just felt huge. Yeah. Symmetry helps people. So okay, as you were.
No, I completely agree with that, and I think another important thing, in all seriousness, to mention here is that Yamaha AVR receivers are really well built. The build quality is outstanding.
They're nicely made. They're nicely made. They got the 5th foot. What do they call it? ART, isn't that something?
ART, the art foot, yeah.
ART, the art wedge. It's a 5th foot. It's nice and stable. In terms of basically, if you're saying what's the difference between this and last year, as you've already mentioned, Phil, updated menus, although they're still a bit confusing. New remote control, which is great. They've dropped the HDMI input from the front panel for some reason.
They've done that on the 3080 as well.
Yeah, but done them on all of them. I mean, they all have the same basic layout. And otherwise, I think the rear connections are identical, and they have added, as I said, surround AR. I'll come back to that in a second. And I think did they add EARC to last year's generation? It's definitely been added to this year's generation, so it does support EARC on the HDMI inputs and output, or sorry, the output rather.
Yeah, and you got Dolby Vision pass through and all that on there as
Dolby
well.
Vision pass through, but you don't have
year.
HDR10 Plus pass through. So
Yeah,
that's worth bearing in mind. As far as I'm aware, no AVR manufacturers mentioned that yet. But otherwise, it's very simple. My big problem with their lower tier, this is, I guess, this is probably, it's not actually the entry level model in the Avantage range, but it's lower down the range. But my big issue with this receiver is that in terms of its immersive audio processing, it is pretty limited because it can only process a maximum of 5.1.2. So you've got no upgrade options there. You can't add more amplification. It's literally only does 5.1.2. You could do 7.1, 5.1, or 5.1.2. That's it. You can't do anything else. And I've got to say, price-wise, it's more expensive than Denon's that have, this has only got 7 channels built in as well. So it's got 7 channels built in, and it's limited to 7 channels of processing. Whereas you look at Denon, you've got 9 channels built in, and it can do
11.2.
a full 7.1.4 system.
Yeah.
The thing is, though, you can always tell with manufacturers, and it's not just actually. This is a wider argument. It applies to car manufacturers. It applies to computer manufacturers, etc. Yamaha has spent the last 2 years getting their high-end 2-channel components out the door, and you can clearly tell that some of the really clever engineers have been involved in that, and they haven't been able to devote a huge amount of time to AV receivers. It's not for a second there's anything wrong with the AV receivers, but in the same way that Denon hasn't been doing, Denon really has been pushing their AV receivers as one of their big activity points over the last 12 to 18 months. And it really shows with that flagship one box that you looked at and so on and so forth. Even these very large companies, there's a finite number of people available at any given time to do certain things. And I have no doubt in my mind that those Yamaha 2-channel components are going to be absolutely outstanding and critically have a much longer shelf life than the AV receivers. But it does have a bearing on the things that they can do, and you can tell that people have been involved in other projects.
The problem for me is that it feels like not just Yamaha, but the AVR sector in general. I'm not saying everybody, but in general, seem to have been treading water for the last 5 years. And I'm not really sure why that is the case. It might be that because the market is shrinking, that they're cutting their losses and just releasing these small incremental changes every year, because there's nothing major there.
I do think that at the moment there is a perception, possibly correct, possibly not, that any significant investment in the category would not necessarily yield the commensurate return. Yeah,
which is kind of what I thought anyway. If you look at the industry, people are, when we've said it umpteen times on the podcast, people are navigating themselves towards smaller systems, sound bars or immersive sound bars with a couple of rear wireless channels. That seems to be the big area at the minute, and AVRs, and this is why I'll come back to the menu system as well, Steve, is for AVRs to work, they need to be more like the sound bars where it's plug and play. And for AVRs to work, and the only company I really see pushing that forward, and I hate to, because it sounds like we're championing Denon here, and we're not. It's just that they're doing a lot of things right at the minute. They seem to be the only company out there that are actually holding people's hands and showing them this is how you set your product up.
Yeah, absolutely. Denon and Marantz, because it's essentially the same company.
Yeah.
They have their setup wizard. Takes you through the whole process. They've got very intuitive menus. They've got a really well-designed remote control. They are relatively straightforward to set up for an AVR and very easy to use, and they provide you all the information both on screen and on the front panel. They are streets ahead of the competition as far as I'm concerned in terms of that aspect of their performance. If you only want a 7-channel AVR and you're never going to need more than that, then certainly this is a great sounding AVR. It's well made, it sounds good, it's got plenty of power. It's fantastic. But when you consider that for less money, I think currently for £949, you can get the AVR X4500 from Denon. And for that, you get 11.2 channels of processing. You get 9 channels built in. You get Atmos, Auro 3D, DTSX, IMAX Enhanced. You get, what have you got? Odyssey Multi-QXT32 setup. You've got Denon Heos multi-room system built in. You've got Apple AirPlay 2. You've got compatibility with Alexa and Google Assistant. When you add it all up, I just cannot imagine there is nothing that comes close to that in terms of value and performance. Nothing.
Yeah.
And that's just the way it is. And so, yes, if you only want 7 channels, and maybe you've got a music cast system and you really want a Yamaha receiver, then that's fine. But if someone says to me, what would you recommend buying AVR wise? Then if you're in the sub £1,000 bracket, then the Denon is the only choice available, I think.
Yeah. But if it is just a small system, like you say, Steve, the Yamaha it is a good machine.
It's a great machine,
and the 3080 as well is really good. I don't think they've moved it on very very much in the last 5 years.
The big introduction this year, the big thing they'll bang on about, if you ask them, I did say this to them. I said, what's the difference between this and last year then? And it's basically the addition of Surround AI. So what they've got now is
cool.
It is very cool, and I have to say now this is cool. If you're a purist, you probably, no, I just want to leave it the way it is. But what it does is essentially like a lot of these AI sound systems you're getting on TVs now. It's analyzing the audio content and it's adjusting the processing accordingly. So it's a bit like, obviously, if anyone who's ever seen a Yamaha product, a Yamaha AVR knows they've got hundreds of different modes, sound, DSP.
They are the masters when it comes to DSP.
They are, and they've been doing it.
Although for whatever reason, it only ever seems to go in the end to Hall in Munich.
Yeah, it does. But I mean, they've been doing this for 25, 30 years. They've been doing this stuff right from the original Dolby Pro. It wasn't even a Pro Logic at the time. It was just a Dolby surround system that they launched.
Dolby Surround was what it is now.
Yeah, and it hasn't really changed in that time.
Yeah.
It's just the processing power's got a lot faster and a lot more advanced, but it's still the same. It's still the same holes that they went out and measured all those years ago.
They also have things like sci-fi mode and action movie mode. So you've got different content you can select for sci-fi or action movies, and basically, it processes the surround and gives it a bit more presence, maybe a bit more action at the rear, or a bit more of a height presence. This kind of stuff. They were doing heights long before any of this immersive audio stuff came along. So they've been ahead of the game, and they are really good at it. So what the AI thing does is it basically, analyzes the audio content and then selects the correct processing based upon the content for you, rather than you going in and selecting a specific DSP mode yourself. And as Ed says, it's quite cool, and it does work. It's not, it's manipulating perhaps the original sound designer's intent, but it certainly can make something sound bigger or more immersive, or just have more of a presence to it. So it's a fun thing, but I don't know whether it on its own it justifies an upgrade, or it definitely doesn't really. I don't think. But
I've got to say I switched it off. I listened for a few hours. I tried it out, and but for me, like you say, it just expanded things and filled in some gaps and boosted it out, but it felt a little bit unnatural to me. Especially with soundtracks that I am so used to, like the Caesar and the Planet of the Apes scene, when it's deadly quiet and you've got the human voices. It just seemed to be artificially widened and a bit more spacious. It's almost like Hall in Munich, you know what I mean? It's just, you can tell it's adding something on there.
Well, I mean, I was quite impressed on some of the demonstrations and things I did. What you highlight there is entirely correct. It needs to. A quiet place is not going to be the time to wheel out Surround AI, but Fury Road probably is. So it's one of those things. I mean,
people do like this kind of stuff. I mean, I was intrigued long ago. I think the first one I ever bought was a 1080 or something. No, it was the A1. DSP A1 was the first Yamaha I purchased. And one of the reasons I purchased that was because it had Hall in Munich and Frankfurt and a couple of other stadiums and the Roxy Theatre?
Yeah, Tokyo Sex Dungeon. No, they got rid of that one, didn't they?
But you see, this was intriguing for me. It was one of the reasons I purchased that product. It was interesting with the height channels and everything else. And if you don't take the purist view and you want your blockbusters to sound really spacious and enveloping and immersive, even if now I'll come back to this question. If you want that, it's great. These things do it. One thing I want to ask you, Steve, Cinema DSP, Surround AI, my understanding is in the lower models it doesn't work with Atmos and DTSX. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Right, and what was the reasoning that they gave on that then?
It's just decoding horsepower.
Yes, thank you.
Right.
Yeah, but the same question you could ask is why, even though it's only limited to 7 channels of amplification built in, why is it only decoding 7.1.2? I guess that's the same reason.
Right. Yeah.
processing horsepower is limited. But it can. Yes, I was going to ask that question because you've got the 3080, so it does. It can apply AI surround processing to Atmos and DTSX.
And the processor can do it to all 11 channels of silliness. I mean, that's got a lot of grunt. So, but the thing is, you can't blame Yamaha. It's already for AV receiver manufacturers. If you've got a range of these things, they already overlap to a chronic extent, and given that people no longer seem to read or have any interest in what the actual amplified power of these things is when under load, and the only people continuing to bang that particular drum are NAD and RCAM, and I suppose Anthem as well, everything else, it just comes, it's like choosing between your family hatchbacks. It just comes down to, this one's got 2-zone air conditioning over single-zone air conditioning and so on. So you artificially segregate them.
Yeah,
because otherwise people will just buy the cheapest one.
True. But I guess rounding up then, Steve, the 1080 from Yamaha, we've kind of covered a lot of the pros and cons of the unit, but just to wrap up on it.
Yeah, and to wrap up, like I say, it's a very well made and it sounds great, and it's got plenty of power. So if you only need 7 channels, and particularly I think if you've already invested in a music card system, then it's definitely a great addition and worth recommendation. I think if you're just looking for a really comprehensive AVR in that price point, then Denon is the answer. Yeah.
Although that said, I mean, you make a good point with the multis room. I prefer Music Cast over HEOS. I think.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Music Cast is just ridiculously clever.
And outputs, HDMI outputs. Does it do multi room as well? The 1080, because that's a big thing on the 30.
It does do that as well. Yeah.
Good stuff. Right, so that's the Yamaha RX-A 1080. Steve's review will be up this week on that one. So let's move over to Ed. Ed's going to look again at an amplifier, but it's an integrated.
Yes, but the thing is, this time, the last integrated amplifier I looked at for you guys was $5,500 before you started playing around with the paint finishes. So, ever want to recognise the fact that it's not just about, the premium price tags. This is still not a cheap amplifier by any stretch of the imagination. It's £1,600, but it's from a Swedish company called Primare. It is, in fact, I believe, the first Primare product we've ever looked at. It's called the i15 Prisma. And it's one of those products which blurs the boundary between being an integrated amplifier and an all-in-one system. And it doesn't need any source equipment to do what it does. It's got Bluetooth on the back. It's got AirPlay. It's got network audio module built in, digital inputs. And the thing is, and I don't want to go into, it'll all be in the review, so I'll do this as in a succinct way. What Primare has done is given you everything that you need and nothing that you don't. And the only reason it's described as an integrated amp realistically is because it has some partnering equipment in the same range to help you do that. So there's a phono stage if you want to add a turntable. Alternatively, it's just got a line in and would take a turntable with a phono stage built in. There's also a CD transport, which sounds, it's like, what on earth would you need that for? Plenty of people do still listen to CD, and if you've got an amplifier with the decoding on board, why double up? So all it does is take a digital signal out the back of that, and you use one of the digital inputs on the i15 to do the decoding. And the most important single thing about it is that it sounds and works beautifully. I really, really enjoyed my time with this amplifier. I don't want to pretend that it's an insignificant sum of money, but I don't recall listening to a product that was just as comprehensively capable. I mean, I've done some other integrated amp reviews within the last 12 months. There was the Exposure XM5, they've done the Cyrus 1 HD. They're a bit cheaper, and they can keep up with the Primare in a sonic sense, but the Primare is better built, it's better looking, it does more in an effortless way. It really, really is a very, very cool piece of equipment. I was genuinely impressed with how it performs. And it's one of those things where, again, if you've been looking or listening to this, the comments on the AV receiver, and think, I don't know if I want Cinema AI and things like that, you can have one of these. It will still quite happily take the feed from your TV. It won't be HDMI, it'll be optical instead. But you can switch down to 2 channels. And I have to be honest, I've been doing this for a year now. there's an awful lot of the time it's just not going to make that much difference. And then musically, it makes all the AV receivers sound like elephants dancing badly. And I really, really enjoyed my time with it. The review will be up, I'm assuming, this week if I'm talking about it. And it was a bit of a surprise because Primare is not a large company, and when a company says, "Oh, we've integrated all these features," you think, "Well, how well has that been done?" It's a really cracking job, a beautifully realised piece of equipment that I thoroughly enjoyed, and I think the review reflects that.
Okay, good stuff. Ed is right. The review will be up this week, but probably towards the end of the week. So if you keep an eye on the homepage, you'll be able to read a bit more about that one. So that's us almost wrapped up on the review side of things. Like I say, I'm between reviews at the moment, and I didn't really want to talk about them on this podcast because I've still got some of the comparison testing and so on to do. So I am working on.
I want to get everyone's hopes up and have to wait 6 months for the review to turn up.
Yeah,
Ooh.
there is. Yeah.
There's a man who's confident he's already been paid.
So, like I say, I'm working on the AG8 OLED TV from Sony. If you want to know what it's like, go and read the AF8 review. I'm working on that one at the moment. I am. In all seriousness, it's
very similar. What is the difference?
I'm struggling to find differences at the minute. This is that are worth talking about. Basically,
Is Android TV still lovely?
Android is terrible on this TV. It really is.
Really? Because funny enough, on an AF, I calibrated an AF8, AF9. What's the one before?
The AF8 is the lower model. The AF9 is a higher end model.
Yeah. I did one of AF. I think it was an AF9 from which is last year, isn't it?
Yeah.
Towards the end of last year, I calibrated one of those, and the guy was saying that Oreo was performing much better than previous generations, so he was quite happy with it. But maybe
all things are relative.
Hang on. This one doesn't have Oreo on it. It's still on Android 7, and the only way you can update it to Oreo at the moment is if you go to the Sony website, download the firmware onto a drive, USB, and then plug it into the TV and do it that way. I'm not sure how many consumers who go out and buy a TV are confident enough to do that. There's no over-the-air update at the moment, no, for some strange reason.
There presumably will be at some point.
There will be, but at the moment, not at the moment. I understand there are some issues, and I haven't had that information from Sony. That's come from elsewhere. There are some issues at the minute, and that's why it hasn't been updated. But that's what I'm working on at the moment. It just so happens that it uses the same panel as the Philips 903. So I'm going to do some comparison against that. I've also got a C8 here from last year, but again, same panel, same processing and so on. So I'll do between the three of those there. What else am I working on? Oh, the Yamaha 3080.
It's like your Hoover Dam, though, isn't it?
Yeah, it's one that it's sat there for a while, and it's just because I've had so much other stuff just to crack on with it. Unfortunately, it's stayed in the list towards the bottom of the list. It's now at the top of the list, so it will get done in the next week or two. Saying that, I'm also working on a BenQ W2700 4K DLP projector. That's in the cinema room at the moment. I have a Panasonic 58-inch GX 800 TV turning up on Tuesday. I ain't got room for it, I ain't got time for it, but it's turning up on Tuesday. I've also got a Samsung Q85R QLED TV, 55 inch as well. That's being worked on at the moment, as well as a Sharp UI7652E, catchy name, 60 inch on that. And then on the 1st of July, I have a Hisense U7B turning up for review as well. So I've got lots.
Is that their OLED telly?
No, it's a U7B, so it's the same. It's this year's version of the U7. So it was U7A.
Did I do that last year?
Yes.
U7? Yeah. Okay.
So it was U7A last year. It's U7B this year, and it's got Dolby.
That's helpful.
It's got Dolby Vision on board this time around,
Yeah.
which should help that level of TV if it's done correctly, because this is where Dolby Vision really does work. It's where dynamic metadata really works, is with the lower end TVs. Same with the GX800. I'm really looking forward to seeing that, because it'll be interesting to see how that performs with Dolby Vision and HDR10 dynamic metadata, because this is where dynamic metadata should do its thing. It should take the capabilities of the TV into account and give you the best possible HDR picture, and stuff that I've seen so far, the Q70R with HDR10 plus, what a difference playing HDR10 plus compared to static metadata. stuff. So
yeah, it made a noticeable difference in the demos that we saw.
Yeah, and obviously when I've had it here and played about with it, the discs that I have in HDR10 Plus, it made a big difference compared to static. So yeah, really looking forward to that. But as you can tell, I am swamped at the minute with TVs, and I had to beg Samsung to come and pick up a couple of their TVs that had been here for a while just to make some room.
I tend to find that showing the manufacturer or manufacturer's representative the ready to go eBay listing for their product does tend to focus the mind.
No, they weren't bad. Don't get me wrong. They weren't bad. I was happy to have the stuff here. It just got to the point where I physically couldn't move in each room, so things had to give and things had to go back a bit quicker than I really wanted them to, because I wanted to do some more comparison stuff, but I'd just physically run out of space. Steve, what about you? What you got coming up?
Apart from the Yamaha that I've just spoken about, there's also a Harman Kardon citation bar, soundbar review coming up. We've got another soundbar, Samson again, the HWQ80. So read the Q90 review and just take off the wireless rear speakers. You'll be basically in the ballpark on that one. Also got clips.
Hang on. You're not supposed to say things like that, because then I'll say, well, why am I paying you for a review that you just rewrite? You didn't think about that one, did you?
But you want the SEO traffic. Klipsch reference premium 5.1.2 system coming up. So got some horn action coming. I'm going to get the horn. Actually, I think you did a Klipsch system, didn't you? Not so long ago, Ed. The one below that, the reference. Was it Premiere or reference? Which one is? They've got two systems, haven't they? Reference Premiere and Premiere, or reference Premiere and reference? It's bloody
complicated. Yeah, I've done something with referencing, and they were really good.
They are really good. Very sensitive, and very well made and very American.
Yeah, that's a fair assessment. Do read the review. I'm sure that Steve finds a way of expanding that. But
I'll make it a bit longer. And I'm sure people will be delighted to hear that we finally got a BK electronic sub in. The P12 ER. Yes, so I won't spoil anything by saying anything now, but yes, that's been much requested, or at least one of their subs to be reviewed has been requested by just about everyone. So we finally got one in, and yes, I'll be writing up that this week.
Yeah, I think the decision on this one was it's very close to the subs that you did last month.
Yes,
isn't it? So
it's not dissimilar. It is. That's very true, and also very competitively priced.
Yeah. Good stuff. So that's all coming up, and then later in the future, you've got some really interesting processors to look at.
A big ass kit coming. From Focal Astral 16, 16 channel AV processor. That's a processor and amplifier combined. So that's going to be interesting.
Yeah, good luck getting that out of the box.
Quite big. And the Bryston. I'm going to be seeing their SP4 AV processor at some point in the near future. And that should be interesting too.
Should be, because that's a name that goes back quite a number of years. So
never heard any of that kit before, so I'm very curious about that.
You haven't heard any of the kit before? It's been 5, maybe 7 years since I last heard one of their systems. But yeah, very, very nice systems. So it'll be interesting to see how they've moved along with immersive audio and so on. Be interesting to hear that. Good stuff. And then Ed's got hi-fi stuff.
Well, don't make it sound quite... Otherwise, I won't bother. Right. In terms of stuff in the tank and good to go up, we've got the Primare review, which we just discussed. After the Rune review, and people went, it's great, but it's a bit expensive. It's like, well, ever mindful to your needs. I've reviewed a little product from a company called Volumio, who are offering many of the bells and whistles of Rune for a lot less money. So you may find that to be interesting. Excuse me. There is another pair of Audio-Technica headphones, because Audio-Technica release headphones at a truly biblical rate. I could pretty much do a new Audio-Technica pair of headphones every single month, and I wouldn't scratch the surface of what they do. And then on a longer lead out, we've got voice-activated loudspeakers. We've got a network streamer that has no interface at all. It is honestly, it's going to be the shortest features specification box I think I've ever done, because it is essentially It has no interface of its own, no decoding of its own. It's just a streaming front end. And that probably sounds utterly bizarre, but I'm hoping that the review will make some sense of it. And you may find, depending on the equipment that you already have in your system, that it's the single most useful review you read in the space of 6 months. So I don't want to build that one up, but I think you might quite like that one. And then Whisper It. The request has gone out to have a look at a record player from a company called Technics, who I'm led to believe are in some way quite good at record players. There seems to be some evidence that they are. So we'll see how that goes as well.
Good stuff. Right, so that's what we've got coming up for a review towards the end of this month and into next month. We'll keep you informed as to how we're getting on with these reviews, and who knows, I might be talking about the Yamaha review next week on the podcast, as well as the Sony OLED TV, and I'm sure things will change. Things tend to change on a weekly basis, so we might even have some more stuff. There is some stuff, but we're not sure when it's coming in. But as soon as it does come in, everything else will be getting dropped. So we'll leave it at that. So that's it for hardware. We're moving on to movies next. Okay, moving on to movies. I was supposed to see Toy Story 4. And unfortunately, I got stuck in traffic and I missed my screening. So I'm going to go and see it this week at some point. There's quite a few films, actually, I want to catch up with. So I'm going to get that done this week. But unfortunately, I missed my Toy Story showing. Steve, have you seen it yet?
No, I haven't had a chance, basically. But I was hoping to go and see it this week at some point.
Okay.
So I haven't seen it. Hopefully Kaz has, otherwise.
I
Well,
am written a review, so I really am hoping that Kaz has done it.
Made that up.
But I'm just going to bypass Ed. There's no point asking Ed. So, Kaz, have you seen it?
I think so. I think I wrote a review about it.
Okay. Was it any good?
I thought it was excellent.
Okay, thanks for your review.
That's the summary of the entire thing. I don't want to give away anything to you guys because you haven't seen it and you have to see it. But the question everyone's asking, and appears to be asking on the forums as well, is why they've made it. Why have they made a fourth film? The third one was perfect ending. Why are we making a fourth film? It's just a cash cow. I agree that's an easy sentiment for people to feel. I mean, the third one was a perfect ending. But somehow they found a way of continuing the story in an organic, natural fashion that gave it a new perfect end. And I think that it was worth telling that story. And they clearly think that it was worth telling that story. And I'm glad we got it. It doesn't take away from what's gone on before. And it brings around a previous arc, which you could argue, if you're a franchise fan, was unresolved by the third movie, and it makes that the focal point, and gives a different sense of closure going forward. And I think they've done a winner. I mean, it's their strongest franchise. I don't think they hit all of their sequels. We're talking Pixar here. I don't think they hit all of their sequels out of the park at all. But they appear to want to take their time when it comes to Toy Story and really deliver something decent. And this, to me, was well worth returning to. I think it's Tom Hanks who carries pretty much the whole thing. Tom Hanks is Woody, and he's the focal point. Perhaps more so than since the first movie, and it's the usual Pixar magic, which is by the end of the opening flashback prologue, it'll have you wondering whether there's something in your eye, and by the end of the movie, you'll be right there again.
It's not kind of catastrophic, is it?
It's not.
It's not like the opening sequence of Up.
It's going to rip you to pieces emotionally.
It's not gonna. They do it really well, and I have to say, and people have also commented about this. It's the most beautiful of all the Toy Stories visually. I heard I don't know whether Steve done this, but I heard it's the first one they've done in full fat 4K. But it's stunning. I saw it in one of the showcase X Plus super screens, and it looked phenomenal. Like it looked lifelike at times, which Toy Story has never necessarily aspired to do. But like water and reflections and street lights, it really it really had an extra layer this time round in comparison to the others. I thought it was tremendous. It was really, really, really great addition to the franchise.
Now you've said it's going to be a blubfest, I'm not sure I want to see it in public now.
I mean, it's just touching. It's a tense and touching opening, and it's another fitting finale. You know, it's very nicely done.
Okay, good stuff. That sounds interesting. I definitely am going to see it this week. And like I say, there's a few other things I want to pick up on as well.
I fancy Brightburn.
Yeah, although the review that came in from Kumari wasn't that strong, was it, Kaz? I think she gave it a 6.
She did. I think she said it was enjoyable. I would say she tends to mark about a notch down from me.
Yeah, Kumari's a harsh marker. She gave Men in Black International 2 out of 10.
Yeah. So I think that she meant it as in it's above average, but I can see that it hasn't. It depends what you're in the frame of mind for. If you read Kumari's review, she does talk a lot about how the anti-hero genre is something that hasn't really picked up on, and it's always nice to have a new addition to that. You know, the sort of kick-ass Watchmen style genre, and the dip over into horror is also fresh. I think if you're in the mood for something a bit different, I'm certainly interested in seeing it. Knowing that I'm probably going to review it on disc means that I'm not itching to cinema job it.
I think I'll do it as a double bill with Toy Story 4. That sounds like it should work nicely. Actually, annoyingly, this Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday of next weekend, there's IMAX screenings in Cardiff for Apollo 11, so I might go and see that as well. Yeah,
we're coming on to that in a minute. It's on the
running
order.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, right. So films coming up this week. Then let's jump to it. We'll all take one. I think there's more than one each, but we'll all take one to start with. Right, Yesterday, directed by Danny Boyle, which is immediately piques my interest. One of the writers, Richard Curtis, usually hit and miss, but I've seen the trailer for this, and it reminds me of. I'm sure we've all done it, where we've sort of dreamt of time travel, going back in time with the knowledge that you have now, and would you take advantage of that knowledge? Going back in time, and it's kind of like that in some respects, where the Beatles never existed, basically. So this guy wakes up, he remembers the Beatles, nobody else remembers the Beatles, and it looks like he then takes advantage of that fact to become a superstar along the lines of John Lennon. And I've got to say, it sounds far-fetched, but at the same time, I think it kind of, like I say, marries into what people have probably thought about themselves. If you could time travel and go back with... Now, this is not a time travel movie, but let's just say you wake up one morning and nobody's ever heard of something and you could take advantage of it. And I guess there's quite a bit of morality in this story as well about that. They're going to feed that in there somewhere. Danny Boyle's always good as a director. He's a bit hit and miss, but even his misses are still really entertaining to watch. And the one thing that he does do well is music. There's something about his films and musicality and the music that he uses in his films, as well as the Olympics opening ceremony, which was very music heavy as well, and he used it in really interesting ways. And I'm looking forward to it. I would go and see this, even though I think it's a bit far fetched. I haven't really heard of many people that are in it, but I'm willing to give it a go. Anybody else?
Yeah, I quite like the look of it.
Well, I don't go to the cinema for major events, so no. When it appears on Netflix / Amazon Prime / whatever, yeah, maybe. But no, it's not going to tempt me to drag my ass to the cinema. Sorry.
Okay. I think
I'd agree with the sentiment over Danny Boyle. In fact, I'm still a bit smarting over the fact that he got kicked off Bond, because I think I'd like to have seen what he'd have brought to
I would.
The Bond vision. But I think I'd have probably... The caveat to that is that I wouldn't have minded it with a different Bond, because that would have been like a real start.
Well, it seems like, certainly reading between the lines, it seems like he had some really interesting ideas that just didn't sit with the producers, with the Broccolis at all.
Yeah, it was taking it too much of a different direction, I think.
Yeah.
Did Danny Boyle make a film with Daniel Craig? I'm trying to think.
I don't think he has. No, I think the only time he's worked with him was the Olympics opening.
Oh yes, he worked with the Olympics. That's what I'm thinking of. I knew he'd worked with him on something. I can't remember what. Yeah, of course he did.
Yeah, it was that sequence, the opening sequence for the Olympics, which was incredibly funny. Right, so that's yesterday. Let's go to Ed.
Shall I do this one?
Yeah, you go next, Ed.
Well, I'm not going to watch this, and I have to be honest.
I don't think anyone else is either. The Queen's Corgi,
the British monarch's favourite dog, gets lost on the palace and finds himself at a dog fight club. The first rule of which, presumably, is you don't talk about it. I don't know. He then begins his long journey to find his way back home. There are probably some experimental surgical procedures I'd rather undertake than go and see that.
Well, it's an animation.
That it required 2 directors to pull this one off.
A kid's film about dogfighting does seem quite unusual.
Yeah.
To be honest, let's face it, there is a rich vein of doing terrible things to dogs in children's films over the years. So,
what films do you watch, Ed, about doing things to dogs in films?
Oh, and what's the other one with the research dogs on the island?
That's not
Dr.
Secret
Moran.
of Nim, is it?
Well, there's that as well. Although that's pretty bleak for all animals.
You thinking Moreau?
No, it's not. I'm going to have to. Whilst you discuss other ones, I shall have to go onto Google and find it. But I mean, that's
I think this is a film that's getting buried for the summer holidays. Basically, that's what it looks like.
Yeah, but come on. Even then, this still seems like it's ill-matched. It's like it's out at the same time as Toy Story 4. Now I'm, I know my son reasonably well. Given the choice between Toy Story 4, even though he hasn't watched all the preceding Toy Stories, or this, I just can't see it.
I've got to say the voice cast doesn't seem.
I haven't heard anyone involved in this film apart from Julie Walters.
Yeah,
and the fact they have to put Dame Julie Walters means they're trying to give it some sort of level of respectability, which suggests it's absolute cobblers.
It does. So let's move on.
Are we sending anyone to watch this?
No, we're not.
Punishment.
No.
Has anybody wronged us?
No, we're not that cruel, Ed. We really aren't that cruel. But Kaz has been to see the next one, so Kaz is going to discuss this next one.
Sure, yeah. So nobody expected a sequel to Braveheart, did they? So
well, isn't this the same story as Outlaw King?
Well, it's interesting you say that. Yeah, it pretty much is. It's a slightly narrower focus. But
I watched the trailer.
Can we tell people what we're talking about before we start?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Sure.
You should probably mention the title of the film.
So, Robert the Bruce. So, in Braveheart, Angus McFadden played Robert the Bruce, and it was a controversial version of Robert the Bruce in Braveheart.
I think most of Braveheart's fairly controversial.
Yes,
well, it was all cobblers, so.
I mean, this was perhaps particularly controversial. One of the things, I mean, in writing the review and watching this, I had to do a modicum of research, and I didn't realise that the name Braveheart was actually Robert the Bruce's nickname.
Yes. And
nothing to do with William Wallace. Mm-hmm. And so I think there's a certain amount of righting wrongs here. McFadden has come back, best part of a quarter of a century later to try and fix the.
Sorry, what? How do you pronounce that?
I'm sorry, McFadden.
It's McFadden.
McFadden.
Angus McFadden. I've only said it wrong 17 times so far. Angus McFadden. So he's come back to right some wrongs, because the Braveheart version of his character had him giving up William Wallace.
Yeah, he did. He betrayed him to the English.
It turned him Judas for no reason other than Judas. And so he's clearly not particularly happy with that outcome, nor with the portrayal of William Wallace as Braveheart, I guess. He hasn't got a huge budget to work with. He wrote this. It is the same story as Outlaw King, but it's a narrower focus, and it's not designed to provide epic battles. But
I noticed there were a distinct lack of epic battles in the trailer, which suggests it's very low-key.
It's just a reflection maybe on what made Robert the Bruce.
Okay, so is it worth going to see, Kaz? I think is like, if we're cutting to the chase here.
You know what? If you're gonna if you've really got it in your heads that you need to see something to fix what Braveheart did wrong historically, then you can go and see it. But otherwise it's probably another Netflix job, just like Outlaw King was.
Right. Okay. Good stuff.
But, you know,
Can I just say my favourite
nice
thing
that
about
they-
this? My favourite thing about this film is that they managed to take a grant off the Scottish Parliament to film it in Scotland and then largely shot it in America, which is just magnificently cynical.
It's
So well done there.
Yeah, that's how the film industry works these days, isn't it? Right, let's move on because we need to get to the end this week. We need to do the end subject. So yeah, we're gonna crack through these. So the next film out, I'm guessing this is going to be limited release as well as In Fabric. Basically, it's a ghost story set against the backdrop of a busy winter sales period.
It sounds crap when you read it like that, but Peter Strickland's made some interesting films. Barbarian Sound Studio was actually really
Right,
good.
okay. But I'm
and
reading.
so was the Duke of Burgundy.
I'm
so
reading this and it sounds ridiculous. It sounds like a Sports Direct takeover.
Well, is it comedy horror though?
Yeah, well.
So you never know.
Yeah, but anyway, it's about a cursed dress that gets passed from person to person after being bought from a department store. And there's devastating consequences, seemingly.
I'm actually waiting outside the cinema several days in advance to see this.
Good.
It's tremendous.
Right, there's one that I am absolutely dying to see. I had an argument with Odeon Cinemas on social media because this is a restricted release. It's Apollo 11 in IMAX. I sent a message to Odeon and said, why is this not playing at the Metro Centre? And I got a blunt reply saying, well, go and see it in Manchester because it's playing there. And
it's restricted in the sense of it's restricted to the number of IMAX cinemas it's playing in, and not just the fact it's only playing for 3 days.
It looks like Odeon has it in about 5 screens, none of them within 200 miles of me. Which is
Well, like
really
that,
annoying.
I
It is
will
showing
go
at
and
Cardiff.
see it in Manchester, but only if you pay me the £400 in Superman London it's going to cost me to get there.
Exactly. So I don't know what's happening with that because they said check back on Tuesday when they redo the listings and it may appear. So it sounds like I'm not the only person. Well, I wasn't on the thread. I wasn't the only person complaining about this. I think they've really seriously underestimated how many people actually want to see this. So hopefully it will get released on more screens.
It's only the 50th anniversary of the moon landing. I mean,
Yeah.
why would you want to make an effort?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's a real shame too, because from what I've read about the IMAX, I mean, I've seen the film, I've seen the Blu-ray, but from what I've read about the IMAX presentation, 65mm footage that they've used is apparently just absolutely jaw-dropping. So, like I said, I think I'm going to hopefully get a chance to pop in. If I possibly can, I'm going to go and see it either on Friday, Saturday, or Sunday when it's screening in Cardiff. So, in fact, after this podcast is finished recording, I'm going to start looking at ticket availability and see what I can do.
Yeah.
But yes, for those that don't know, I think I've mentioned on previous podcasts, but I'll make it quick. Apollo 11, it's a documentary about the Apollo 11 mission, obviously using footage, existing footage that's been cleaned up, but also footage they discovered, shot at the time on 65mm that's never even been developed. So it's in absolutely pristine condition, meaning that some of the footage you see, particularly from the launch and from the recovery, looks like it was shot yesterday. They've also taken all the mission control and astronaut communications, and that's been cleaned up, and they've actually timed it with the footage. So when you see mission control, you see them talking, you can actually hear what they're saying. I mean, I have seen the film, as I say, and it is absolutely brilliant. The launch is just so tense. And the landing, which is done in real time. So they actually turned on the 60mm camera in the lunar lander as they start, just before they started the landing, and then they show the landing in its entirety from the footage shot on 65mm camera, 60mm camera, and they also show on the other side of the screen they show the time, because they got 4 minutes of fuel, and that's counting down. And they also show you the altitude and everything, and downrange and all this sort of stuff. It's absolutely nail biting, and they land with about 6 seconds of fuel left. It's amazing to watch, and it really brings home the achievement. And so, if you do get a chance, if it is showing an IMAX cinema near you, I highly recommend you go and see it.
But it probably won't be.
I'll check Milton Keynes. I won't go, but I'll check.
just a rubber nose
if
in
you're
it.
going to go to the cinema, this is worth getting on your ass, getting off your ass.
Can we be clear? The part of that sentence, if you're going to the cinema, and I'm not, but no, okay, it's a nice sentiment. But yeah, okay, that's fine. Right, just before we finish, depressing dog films in no particular order. There's Isle of Dogs, which is pretty depressing. Plague Dogs, which is incredibly depressing. Marley and Me, which is not necessarily a children's film, but is also incredibly depressing. And Old Yeller, which is a children's film and incredibly depressing. So dogs get a dull run in these things. They usually wind up dead, shot. Yeah. So, yeah. Okay,
They're doing John Wick as well.
Yeah. But at least that dog is avenged.
Yeah,
That's true.
it is.
Well and
It is
truly.
indeed. Well and truly. Christ, one dog and a body count of many hundreds. Right. Let's move on very quickly again, Kaz. Hint, hint.
Sure.
4K and Blu-ray.
Okay, we got Cold Pursuit coming out Monday.
Is this the one with Liam Neeson?
Liam Neeson
Well, he
promised to not do any action movies. Come back and done
Promised
an
not
action
doing more
movie.
promotion for it, I should imagine, and keep his mouth
Remake.
shut.
It's a remake, and I don't think the mix of dark humour and action went down very well. But we'll see how that pans out.
All the racism that came with the promotion.
No, that's come out 4K and Blu-ray. That's the only 4K release. We also got The Kid Who Would Be King coming out Blu-ray. The 4K release got binned in the UK. We're covering that. It's only got 4K in the US. Arctic, which I don't think got a cinema release. That's Mads Mikkelsen survival thriller. John Woo Films, the two films up for a comp. They're out by Eureka. A couple of his early films, which hopefully bodes well for some of his later classics coming through. Donbass, Eureka, For All Mankind, Criterion. A couple of Paul Newman films, Harper and The Drowning Pool. The Arnie Running Man.
Yay!
Running Man, wasn't it?
Finally,
We
not
got that
the
very wrong.
Running Man. That's The Running Man, I think. Is
We got it wrong last week.
Happy Death Day to You, the sequel, if you've seen the first one, and Krzysztof Kieslowski's Decalogue.
Okay, good stuff. And streaming-wise, anything
Yes,
worth looking at?
streaming, we've got Warrior Season 1, which was the Bruce Lee written and Bruce Lee's estate funded.
This was his original intention for what became Kung Fu, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
It's like a period set martial arts mix, and it's supposed to be really good. I think it's out already in the US. It's coming to Now TV this week, and we're also getting Shaft, which
Ooh, so not getting a theatrical release in this country.
no, but
Didn't
in,
do very well in the States.
in
which
the
is
US
just
it only
not-
got released theatrically 2 weeks ago, and then it's getting global Netflix release this Friday, which is the Shaft sequel that no one was asking for, where it's 3 generations of Shaft now. Sam Jackson is coming back, as is Richard Roundtree, but they're passing it on to, I don't even know who he is, but it doesn't look...
Is Richard Roundtree actually any older than Samuel L. Jackson?
No, it's a curious thing. I mean, he does look a bit older because Samuel L. Jackson can still pull it off, but yeah, it's.
Yeah, I watched Captain Marvel last week, and the de-aging is amazing. But there's a scene where he starts running down a corridor, and you think, yeah, you look 70 in that shot, mate.
Yeah, the running is interesting, but there's certain actors who always have that running. I mean, you look at Harrison Ford; he's been running like a 70-year-old since he was 30.
Yeah, since he was doing Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yeah. So no one's going to see Shaft, but since it's out on Netflix, it might be worth. We'll find out.
No, I probably will watch it because I can watch it for free.
Yes.
You know.
Yes. It's supposed to be a comedy, unlike the last one, and like the original.
Wasn't the preview the Shaft? No, the Shaft. Was it meant to be? Was it a sequel or a remake?
It was a remake, which also featured Richard Roundtree.
Yeah,
so it's a reboot, but it was
directed by
Singleton.
Yeah, the late John Singleton.
Singleton, which isn't a great thing to have to his name, and it had Christian Bale in it.
Yeah, he was the villain, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. It had some good ingredients, but it wasn't anything particularly special. And I wouldn't say that the original films were groundbreaking, other than
the soundtrack. That's what anyone remembers it for.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Streaming wise, that's what's coming up that we know about, because you know what Netflix is like.
Richard Roundtree is 6 years older than Samuel L. Jackson.
Yeah.
But that's like Last Crusade, isn't it?
Yes. Sean Connery.
Yeah, Sean Connery. Yeah. Right. So streaming wise, quickly TV wise, because it started last week, and I said I was going to avoid it. I actually watched it, and it wasn't actually that bad. I think this Top Gear might actually work, strangely and perversely.
It's got self-deprecation, and they do. It would appear clearly quite like each other. It's not forced for the TV. They do genuinely seem to get on.
no,
So
there
I
was
wish
some
them the
good-
very best of luck.
Good chemistry there, which nobody was expecting. Although Paddy McGuinness still gets on my nerves. But as long as he's in small amounts,
I'm
it
just
should be
waiting
fine.
for someone to say Giacomo. I'm not going to lie, that's just very hard not to overcome. But it's otherwise, no, I thoroughly enjoyed the first one. And as you say, it's always good value to see an Escort Mark II, even if it had the wrong number of doors.
Yeah, well, that did work for it as well. There was some classic British motors in there, which is always nice to see being highlighted on the TV, especially in that colour that the Mark II. The only thing wrong was, like you pointed out to me, was it was a 4-door instead of a 3-door.
Too many doors.
Too many doors, unfortunately. But there you go. Right, so our subject last week, because we'd been in New York, was the best films ever set in New York, and we ran out of time. So we've purposely rushed through the movie section. Sorry, Kaz, to do this to you, but we have purposely rushed through it so we can actually talk about this subject, because I'm sure Steve has a list as long as his arm, which in fairness isn't that long. But we're going to go to Steve first then. Steve, the best films ever set in New York.
Okay. I mean, there's obvious examples. Manhattan. Woody Allen's Manhattan is a love letter to New York. So, you know, if you're going to watch one film set in New York and about New York, that'll probably be my choice. My personal favourite New York-based film was definitely Escape from New York, which I loved when I saw it.
It's a very
as a kid.
realistic.
You know what?
representation of New York.
Escape from New York is like most science fiction. What it does is tell you about the time it was made, and when it was made, New York was a shithole. And you'd want to escape from it. The idea of turning Manhattan into a supermax prison now, when it's the most expensive real estate on the planet, seems unlikely. But back then, it was a bit of a dump, and therefore you probably would have thought that was probably a good idea. I also, similar vein, I've always really enjoyed The Warriors, which again is kind of almost really a fantasy about a gang of New York gang trying to get home across New York when they've been gone to a gang meeting and they've been framed, and they have to battle their way across New York to get back to their own territory, which I've always really enjoyed. Directed by Walter Hill. So those are some of my favourites. I mean, obviously you could say things like King Kong. I mean, quintessentially a New York movie. Mm-hmm. Anything by Woody Allen pretty much would come into that category, I suspect.
Now, one that we discussed. Yeah, one that we discussed while we were standing at the very venue. So we're standing at the public library, and it's always one thing that narked me about The Day After Tomorrow was the fact that they all run into the public library, because it's not a very tall building. And I always assumed that if the sea was surging in like it is in that film, there's no, you'd go for a high building, you wouldn't go for the library. But it wasn't until we were actually standing there and me and Steve were discussing it. Manhattan's not flat in terms of elevation. So actually the elevation that you're at when it comes to the public library is actually quite high up, which I'd never, in my because I'd never been to New York before, so I would never have assumed that was the case. You actually walk down the hill to the Empire State Building, because the Empire State Building is actually down in a dip, which again, and it's right on the roadway as well, which is really odd. But then it was built as an office block, wasn't it? But it just seems odd that it is the corner of a block. So for me, I always thought that was cobblers until I've actually stood on the site and thought, well, actually, if the sea did surge in, you're probably at a high enough elevation to be above it there.
Yes, absolutely. I just thought of another film in my New York as a hellhole trilogy, which would be Taxi Driver. Yeah, Taxi Driver, The Warriors, and Escape from New York.
Gotta be up there.
Would all put you off going to New York in the 1970s and 80s.
I reckon if you watch Taxi Driver, you can kind of see why they might have gone with Escape from New York. Yeah. That's it's a lot.
Maybe that the character Taxi Driver is just Ernest Borgnine's character. He's got a bit older. That's all, and now he's still driving his cab around.
Yeah, I'd say a lot of Scorsese films during that period were New York as well, because he did Mean Streets,
absolutely.
And I would probably go also with King of New York, which is.
Abel Ferrara.
Abel Ferrara, yeah, because he also liked New York. He's bad lieutenant there, but King of New York was an interesting spin on the mayor of New York, with Christopher Walken really
chewing the scenery.
Yeah, really, and I think that's a really underrated little gem.
I guess Godfather's also a New York movie, isn't it? That's based around New York.
The Wikipedia entry for films to do with New York is just ridiculous.
Yeah,
but the actual number of those that are cut down where you could actually say they are a love letter to New York is significantly smaller than that.
Well, I think
Normally-
there's lots of tax reliefs, aren't there?
Yeah.
So I think that's why a lot of them were filmed there.
Mm.
But there
But-
are only a few, as you say, that
Plus,
are
also, it's so cinematic. You stick a camera anywhere in New York, and you
Yeah,
got
well, this is what I was going to
Why
come on
not
to.
film?
But it's also a case of it's been used so many times in disaster movies. How many times have we seen New York getting pummeled to the ground or being hit by
Yeah.
asteroids and all that kind of
It's had
thing?
more than its fair share of
Yeah.
thumpings.
Yeah,
And
it's
it's had King Kong and
Independence Day.
it's had loads.
Godzilla.
Yeah.
And it's home of Spider-Man. Everything from the original Spider-Man movies, the Sam Raimi ones, to even Into the Spider-Verse. It's like a modern take on New York.
If you watch Armageddon, the opening scene is New York getting
Meteorites, yeah.
Yep.
And
New York
there's a
getting hit.
very spooky shot, an aerial
Twin
shot of
Towers,
New York
yeah.
after the bombing with the Twin Towers burning
Yeah.
in almost exactly the same places as they were hit
Yeah.
in reality. And it's kind of slightly weird because that was, 3 years before?
Yeah.
It's a weird, really spooky shot.
Yeah.
Well, one film I remember, I don't even know whether people remember the film, but The International with Clive Owen.
Yeah,
They shot a
do you know what? I
shootout.
watched that. I watched that the other day. They shot that, in the
Shootout
set
in
of
the
the
Guggenheim.
Guggenheim.
Yeah, which I think was an exceptional use of that architecture, because it's a very specific shape, and they used it for a shootout, and it was actually quite a tense
Yeah, I
shoot.
watched that film again
Probably
the other day.
best bit of the film,
I had forgotten how profoundly unsatisfying a film it actually is. But
that's
by the by.
that's actually really, really good. And,
I suppose
again,
the
good
other
use
one
of-
from this very same similar period. What's the one with Matt Damon and Emily Blunt? The Adjustment Bureau.
is that New York?
If I may, I've looked through this. I've given it some thought. My favourite portrayal of New York in any film, mainly because I love the film as well, is how it appears in the original. Nothing to do with John Travolta. He can sod off. Original, The Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3.
Mm.
I absolutely. It's just perfect.
Welcome to Hell.
I absolutely love the film, it's just a little time capsule of magic, and the only in terms of then the use of New York, the only film that then gets anywhere near that for me is wildly different in context and flavour, but it's the third Die Hard.
Oh,
Yeah.
Die Hard 3. Very
Because again, they are New York is absolutely woven into that.
Yeah.
And bits of New York that you don't necessarily normally see in film as well.
That was a focal point, wasn't it? They couldn't get through the traffic, so they had
So they
to
use the ambulance.
follow the ambulance, but the ambulance only goes to a certain hospital, and
Yeah.
they can't get any further than that. I mean, yeah, that's a
I would say the original Ghostbusters.
Well, I was coming on to the Ghostbusters
Ghostbusters.
because for me, one of the things that really surprised me about the city, I kind of expected it, but it was one thing I also mentioned to Steve is the architecture. Everywhere you look, especially the old brick skyscrapers and brick built buildings, there's not one of them there's not any two that look the same. The design, the Art Deco design, and it really did remind me of that aspect of Ghostbusters. You know, the fire station that they used, the building at the end with Zool and all the rest of it, the architecture of the building and stuff, Central Park. It really stood out. And when you're actually standing there and you're looking at these, especially the ones round about Central Park, the architecture is just so different from each building. But they're all round about the same time frame that they were built, and it truly is stunning to look at. If you've never been there before, that's what really surprised me, to be honest, and I did think of Ghostbusters with that.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, for me, it's. I mean, I'll be honest. Cards on the table time. I haven't been to New York, so there's not the physical connection.
You have to go.
Well, look, I struggle to make it 22 miles to the cinema, so I think crossing the Atlantic's a bit of a stretch at the moment, but we'll see how we go. But no, in terms of making use of a location, the three that I mean, especially Pelham 1, 2, 3 and Die Hard with a Vengeance, I just think they make use of the unglam bits of New York in a really, really play. I agree with Steve that Escape from New York is a great film, but it never quite got as bad as that. Let's be honest. But let's face it.
I would add to my quartet now. My quartet of New York's a shithole films. Death Wish, Death Wish,
Yeah,
The Warriors,
yeah.
Escape from New York, Taxi Driver. There you go.
Yeah,
What's
that's
those
cool.
for?
Is there any films you like that don't make New York out to be?
I love Once Upon a Time in America, which
Yeah.
recreates
Right.
turn of the century New York beautifully, as does, of course, Godfather Part 2. So both of those films do a wonderful job of recreating the turn of the 20th century New York beautifully. So those are two of my favourites for that. And obviously, speaking of Scorsese, New York is a love letter to New York as well. So, and gave us the song New York, which was first sung by Liza Minnelli, not Frank Sinatra.
It's amazing how many classic 70s films came out of New York and made it look really quite unpleasant to live in. I mean, even
I don't think you
things
had to
like
try
French-
hard back in the 70s to make it look unpleasant.
Well, no, you
did.
didn't. One other film I was going to mention from a musical genre, I'm sure I've mentioned it in the past. I mean, the acting is absolutely shockingly bad in it, and it was a really low budget film, but it captured hip hop before it was a thing. You know,
I thought you were about to go into West Side Story.
All right.
Thankfully,
not quite.
thankfully no.
So the film was called Beat Street, and it was really low budget, and the acting's terrible and all the rest of it. But I was interested in it back then, and it captured the Bronx when the Bronx was just rubble. You know, this is what Steve's talking about, the horrible looking New York City. It's all captured because it was all filmed while the Bronx was rubble, and it captured the whole music scene, the whole hip hop and rap and break as it was happening, as it was breaking, as it was becoming a thing. So from a historical point of view, just to watch that, just to see what the Bronx looked like, because the Bronx now is nothing what it was like in the 70s and early 80s. The whole city's completely different to what it was. But if you just want to have a look at that, then you'll probably find it on YouTube or something like that. But
I mean, interesting. Obviously, it takes it outside of film, but enough of us have watched it to probably agree. I've always felt that Elementary, the TV series, is in part a love letter to New York. They tread locations which aren't necessarily the given ones, but the city is very. They have always treated the city as a an integral part of what makes that TV series.
Yeah.
And I think they do it extremely well.
And we haven't mentioned the Marvel Avengers movies. I mean, the
Because they're
Avengers.
not-
It's
well,
set through
yeah.
New York, and Doctor Strange is set in New York.
Yeah.
In
and-
the same way, we haven't mentioned Sex and the City either, but I didn't want to. So
Come on, you haven't even seen Endgame, man.
I have seen Endgame.
yeah,
Have you actually seen? You've seen a film in the cinema?
I did. If you remember, I went to see it for what reasons best known to myself. Selected a presentation with subtitles. It was an incredible. It was an
Yes.
incredible read.
This was the famous subtitle thing. It was like the only film you're going to see this year, and you watched it with subtitles.
It's not the only film I'm going to see this year because that Ford versus Ferrari thing is coming out, and I'm going to watch that.
nobody else is going to the cinema to see this, but Ed will be there.
And you, stop
Yes,
lying.
I know I'll be there, but you
We're all
know,
going to see it.
there'll be
It
two
looks
of us.
great. Yeah. They're going to have it restricted at IMAX cinemas just for you.
Yeah, and on that bombshell, that's it for the podcast this week. My thanks to Ed Selley.
Oh, it's my turn. Hang on. That's right, your
I don't have that
toys.
quote in the film.
I said, that's right, your toys.
Steve Withers
Go away, you disgusting freaks.
and Kaz Harlow.
This is the part where we blow up.
Don't forget, you can follow us on Twitter and Facebook, bookmark AVForums.com for latest reviews, news and video. Plus, why not leave us a 5-star rating on iTunes, but only if you enjoyed the show. Also, head over and check out our YouTube channel for videos on the latest product launches and reviews. And while you're there, feel free to subscribe. My name is Phil Hinton. Thanks very much for listening, and we'll see you again next week. Actually, I'm going to do that.
That my name. So
Yeah,
I'm
sorry.
convinced that your name was Phil.
I don't know why I said that. I have no idea why I said that. Yeah. Anyway, enough.